Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini. I post weekly how-to video tutorials right here on my YouTube channel, and in this video I've teamed up with my friends at Northcott Fabrics to bring you a video tutorial on how to create this gorgeous Stars of Valor quilt. Now before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about this Stars of Valor quilt. The designer's name is Patty Carey. She designed it for Northcott Fabrics, so the pattern is free and available for you to download and print the directions and the full pattern pieces, template pieces and all. You can print it out from the Northcott Fabrics website. I've included the direct link to this right in the description box below this video. Click on it and then you'll be able to print out your own version of the pattern so you can create this quilt top. In this video, I'll be walking you through all the steps necessary to create the quilt top. I'll reference the pattern as well, and that way we can make it together. As far as the fabrics go, this pattern features some solid fabrics, some prints, but it's mostly the Stars and Stripes strip pack. These are 2.5-inch wide strips of all these gorgeous different fabrics. All the ones that you see featured here I made just from a pack like this, and some minimal yardage as well. This, and some cream that comes from their Stonehenge collection. Now, as you can see, I'm holding this stuff up and I've already made one. This is because our friends at Northcott have been kind enough to offer a full quilt top kit for one of my viewers. So one of you lucky viewers out there is going to win the strip pack and the fabric that you need to create the quilt top that you see behind me. Now to enter, all you need to do is click in the link in the description box below. That will send you over to my blog, and all the details and information on how you can enter to win this giveaway will be right there for you. This Stars of Valor quilt is designed to finish 57 inches by 65 inches, and as you can see, it's a nice size lap quilt, which at those measurements, it does meet the size guidelines required by the Quilts of Valor Foundation. So it'd be a great project for you to make and donate to Quilts of Valor. So now that we've gone over some basic details, let's jump right into making our Stars of Valor quilt top. So to get started, you need to print out your free PDF pattern, and on the last page of the pattern you'll see the two templates that we need to trace out. So grab some quilter's template plastic and start tracing both of these out. Make sure you go ahead and trace in both lines, the inner ones and the outer ones. And then after you trace out both of these, grab your pair of scissors. You want to cut on the line as straight as you can, making sure to cut on the outer lines, and then go ahead and label your pieces as well so we keep them in the correct orientation. Set those aside, and now we're going to start cutting into our cream strips. The pattern calls for 7/8 of a yard of the cream fabric. To begin, we start off cutting out 6 strips that measure 2.5 inches by the width of the fabric, and those are going to be for our inner border. Go ahead and trim off your selvages now. I like to do them after I cut the strips because I like to keep the selvages on the overage that I have left in case I have that. Go ahead and stitch the 6 strips together end to end using a 1/4-inch seam allowance, so you end up with a super long strip, and set that aside. Now from the remaining cream fabric you have, go ahead and cut out 5 more strips with the same measurements, 2.5 inches by the width of the fabric. Trim off your selvages and grab your large template piece. Now open up one of the strips, lay it down on your surface so that you're working with only one fabric layer at a time. Take the large template piece and lay it so that the flat short sides are against your cut edge right there, and then we're going to start cutting out these pieces. After each cut, you just want to turn your template piece 180 degrees without flipping it upside down or anything. You're just turning it 180 degrees for each cut. This is using up all the fabric and you're getting very efficient cuts. Now I want you to cut out 11 of these pieces from each strip for 4 strips. So after cutting up 4 of those strips, you should have 44 of these large template piece units. And then from the 5th strip, I just want you to cut out 2 more pieces. So there's 1 and there's 2. And then from the remaining strip, we're going to cut out 2 of the small template, doing the same thing, turning it 180 degrees. And then we're going to cut out 2 squares that measure 2.5 inches square. And we're done cutting from that cream fabric. So just to recap, you should have 46 of the large templates, 2 of the small ones, and then 2 squares that measure 2.5 inches square. Set those aside and let's move on. Now we're getting ready to open up our Stars and Stripes pack. So when you take it out, everything is nicely folded into these 2 big chunks of a ton of different fabric strips, and I want you to sort them out. Pull out all the ones that are kind of cream on cream or tone on tone cream colored fabrics, and there in my set there was a 5th one that had these stars on it. Even if yours has a 5th set like that, you only want to pull out 4 sets. So we should have 2 strips of each of these 4 different tone on tone fabrics. Now for these 4 pairs of strips, you want to trim off the selvages and keeping the strips still folded in half, so we're working with 2 layers of fabric at a time. We're going to cut these up into 2.5-inch squares. You're going to get about 16 per strip, and you're going to continue to do that until you get 120 cream-colored squares. Set those aside and let's move on to our colored strips. Working with 2 strips at a time, one layered on top of the other and both with the pretty sides facing up. The strip is completely opened up, match the raw edges as best you can, and you're going to start cutting out pieces with your small template piece. Remember to just turn your template piece 180 degrees for each cut. You want 18 of these cut, so doubled up, that gives us the 36 that we need. And from that last chunk of fabric you have left, you want to grab your ruler and cut out 9 squares that measure 2.5 inches square. So you do need to keep track of how many of the small triangles you're cutting because you don't want to cut into the overage that you need to cut out those 2.5-inch squares. And the same process gets repeated to all 16 pairs of strips from your Stars and Stripes pack. Now head on over to your design wall, and with the 2.5-inch squares that you have from the red, blue, and cream colored squares, go ahead and lay them out randomly in 13 rows of 11. And be sure to leave the 2.5 inches between each square and between the rows, so we can start filling them in as we go to create our quilt top. So notice here, this is how we're going to start filling in. Whatever the fabric is of that square that you have at the top, go ahead and find a corresponding small piece that matches to go on the left, and then whatever the next square is, make sure that it matches with the little small template piece you're putting next to it. Then repeat the same thing across all rows. This is a small triangle that matches the red next to it, then I need one with the flag, and you get the idea. When you have these 2 little triangle pieces, you're going to put one on top of the other and stitch with a 1/4-inch seam allowance, then press the seam open, and now you've created another 2.5-inch square block that's going to fit in right next to that one. So continue to do this for all your rows. Now just as a reminder, the diagonal needs to be going just like you see here, starting at the top left and coming down to the bottom right. Every square that's in between those 2 solids or 2 print fabrics needs to be headed in the same angle. You can see the overall look that you get. Now that those rows are done, let's start filling in every other row, right? So grab a triangle that corresponds to the square that's up top and one that corresponds to the one on the bottom. Stitch them across on the diagonal, create your 2.5-inch square, press your seam, and put it right into place. This time the diagonal should be going from top right to bottom left. The orientation of all these blocks is very important so we can get the overall friendship star block design that we get throughout the entire quilt top. Now repeat that process for every other block. Notice how I'm skipping the square that goes right in the middle there, but the orientation is the same, top right to bottom left. Match the left triangle to the top square and the one on the right to the square beneath it. Continue to do that across all the rows that are missing there, and then go back and fill in the centers with the cream tonal squares that we cut out earlier. Once you have everything in place, you can stand back and have a good look at the entire layout of the center of your quilt top. This is a great time to double check the orientation of all those angles, and then you can start piecing this together. Use your 1/4-inch seam allowance and piece those patchwork pieces into individual rows, then being careful to match up the intersecting points, sew all the rows together to create the full center panel of your quilt top. Now let's move on to attaching the inner borders. They are pieced and you can see that they match each one of the blocks or the units that are above it. Now paying attention to the orientation of these units, we want to look at whatever the first unit is on the bottom edge of our quilt top, match up the diagonal edge with one of our large template pieces. You're going to piece this together along the diagonal with your 1/4-inch seam allowance, press that seam to the side, and that's going to be your first unit. Then looking across to see whatever the block is next to it, continue to do this across the entire bottom edge of your quilt top. And when you get to the end of the bottom row, it's going to end with one of the small cream triangles, which gives us the edge of the quilt top. So you can see here they all match, going all the way across this way, and then you can see the last unit at the end of this strip ends with that small cream triangle. Now the other cream triangle, we're going to use it to start because now we're moving up to the top edge inner border. So we're starting off with the small cream colored triangle on the top left edge and then matching it up to whatever the print or solid fabrics are that correspond to whatever units are on the top edge of our quilt top. Now notice in the large template pieces the orientation of that diagonal. It's now headed in the opposite direction than what we did with the bottom row. So piece all these together into a row, and then you can lay the row right on top and make sure that everything matches up nicely with your quilt top. Then making sure to match up all those intersecting points, stitch that together. We're going to repeat the process to the right and left borders as well. Notice that the bottom of the right end ends with one of the cream colored squares. And as you can imagine, we're going to end up with the opposite on the other side of the border. So next time we're going to start at the top with the cream colored square up there and then continue with the same process to complete the entire inner border of the quilt. At this point, I measure my quilt top from left to right, and I just like to add the top and bottom borders first, but you can do the side ones first if you want to. Then cut that super long cream strip you had, cut it to size. Only cut for the top and bottom first, then go back and measure the height of the quilt top, including the borders that you just added. Otherwise, if you take all 4 measurements before you attach your borders, 2 of your borders are going to be too short. So for the outer border, I cut it down to size, and then pin it across the outer edges. Remember to do 2 sides first. So if you do top and bottom, then do left and right, or do left and right first and then do top and bottom. Once you've added 2 sides of your border, measure all the way across so you can determine the top and bottom borders now for length. Cut your strips to size and stitch them on, and then your quilt top is complete. And now that your Stars of Valor quilt top is done, all you need to do is make your quilt sandwich, quilt it however you want, or have a long armer do it for you, and then finish it off with the binding. That's it for this tutorial. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, hit it with the thumbs up below, share it across the different social media sites, and don't forget to click that subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of my future video tutorials. Thanks again for watching. A big thanks to our friends at Northcott Fabrics. Don't forget to enter the giveaway. I've included the link in the description box below. And thanks again for watching. I'll see you all next time.